everyone. Hello, welcome. We're so excited to have you guys here on this Thursday evening. My name's McKaylee. I work with Tattered Cover Bookstore, which is located in Denver, Colorado, for those who might not know. And I'm so excited to be here. We've been doing these virtual events now for a while, since March, and we're gonna probably keep doing them for a long time. So for those of you who are out there joining us, and this is not your first rodeo, not your first virtual event, thanks for coming back. Thank you for joining us again. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, welcome to our virtual community that we've created here. Tattered Cover has always thought of itself as a community space. And while we may not be able to gather physically together, we are just really grateful to have this virtual community that is growing and expanding. So thank you guys for your continued support so that we can have awesome author events like this one. And I also just want to introduce Tattered Cover, because for some people who might not ever have been to the Denver metro area, or you might not live in Colorado, you might not have heard of this local independent bookstore. We have exactly four locations in the Denver metro area. And we are turning 50 in 2021. So we've been around since 1971, which is a huge deal for an independent bookstore. And the only reason we're still around is because of the community support and the fact that people continue to support local businesses. So we cannot thank you guys enough for that. I want to just do a couple of housekeeping things, like the fact that Tattered Cover has all 4 of our stores open right now. So you can come in and visit us for about 90 minutes or so, as long as you wear your mask over your mouth and your nose. And you can come in and visit with hand sanitizer and gloves if you so do desire. Come and pick out a book or two, or gifts. Get your holiday shopping early. We all know that November is the new December. But if you want to stay inside, shop in your pajamas, or you're not in the Denver metro area, you can always shop online with us. And our website, tatteredcover.com, is open 24/7. So we'd love to see you guys in person, or to see your orders online. And thank you again for continuing to support local businesses. I want to also let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it. The way to enact that is on the screen you're watching me on right now, just hover your mouse and there's a black bar at the bottom. There's a button that says CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled for those who might want it or need it. So we just wanted to give you a quick instruction on that as well. So now it is my honor to welcome the authors of the hour here. And so we are here to celebrate Denise Kiernan's new book. And she's going to be in conversation with Neal Thompson. So a little bit about Neal. Neal Thompson is a journalist and the author of 5 highly acclaimed books, including A Curious Man, Driving with the Devil, the fatherhood and skateboarding memoir, Kickflip Boys. His next book, The First Kennedys, An Immigrant Maid, Her Bartender Son, and the Humble Roots of a Dynasty, will be published in fall of 2021. He has written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Esquire, Outside, Oprah.com, and more, and has taught creative nonfiction at Hugo House and Great Smoky's writing program. He lives in Seattle with his family. And then now we have the author of the hour here, Denise Kiernan. Denise is an author, journalist, and producer. Her last book, The Last Castle, was an instant New York Times bestseller in both hardcover and paperback, and was also a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Her previous title, The Girls of Atomic City, is a New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and NPR bestseller, and has been published in multiple languages. She also has worked in television, serving as head writer for ABC's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire during its Emmy Award-winning first season, and has produced for media outlets such as ESPN and MSNBC, as well as for independent productions. She lives in North Carolina, and we're here to celebrate her newest book, We Gathered Together. So it's my honor to welcome both Neal and Denise, and I'm going to have them join me and turn on their videos here. And there's Denise. Hello. Hi. And Neal, welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Hi, McKaylee.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great intros.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Absolutely. It's your accolades. I'm just reading them off. You're the ones who accomplished all those things. So
But you did a great job reading them.
That was a great read. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Saying, yes.
Well, Denise, I'd love it if you could just start off really quickly with a short summary about what We Gathered Together is about, and then I'll let you two take the conversation from there, and I'll hop off until it's time for the Q&A.
Oh my God, I can't do that. No, it's so funny when you write a book, because you spend all these years conceiving it, and then you spend more years writing it and editing it and revising it. And then it's like, give us a brief summary of your book. And you're thinking, what? No.
I wrote it. I couldn't do it in a minute.
Yeah, totally. So We Gather Together is it's really a look at America through the experience of giving thanks. So we're looking at Thanksgiving, but it really goes back further than that and into the future. And we sort of look at America as a country, actually America before it was a country, pre-colonial times. And we come all the way up through the 21st century. And we sort of look at the concept of gratitude on this continent and others, and then how American Thanksgiving, with like the big T, came to be in the midst of the Civil War, and how that tradition has continued into the 21st century, and how that has evolved and changed over time. And there are some really interesting characters throughout the book. One of the main characters is a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, who was obsessed with the idea of the entire country coming together and giving thanks on the same day. And she wrote about it for years in novels and in her magazines, and petitioned presidents to make this day a holiday. When she was petitioning presidents to make this a holiday, the only national holidays were Washington's birthday and the 4th of July. So she wanted everybody to come together. The president that finally answered her call, so to speak, was Lincoln in 1863 in the midst of the Civil War. So one of the things that kind of got me, I had heard about Hale for a while, but I'm not a biographer. I don't really write biographies. But I was interested, as I always am, in sort of like the juxtaposition of events as opposed to just the events themselves. So I thought it was kind of interesting that you had the seeds of our kind of annual tradition of Thanksgiving sort of taking root in the midst of the Civil War, when everybody was feeling so divided. And that seemed really interesting to me. And then the missing piece that finally made me want to kind of do this book, because I was sort of trying to figure out my way in for a while, was the gratitude piece. So again, see, you asked me like a short description of my book and can't do it. Sorry. That's why Neal is here, because he's going to just like, he's going to drill down and get it out of me.
Just keep going, Denise. I'll sit here with Michaela.
I'm going to pop out and let the two of you take this show over. And like I said before, audience members, keep your questions in your head, and I'll pop back in after their conversation so that we can have Neal and Denise answer your questions. Take it away, you two.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michaela.
Hi, Neal.
Oh, hi, Denise. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
As I mentioned earlier, I am a big fan of your background there. It's very.
Oh, thank you very much. It's amazing. Like, we used to just, oh my God, I have to get on a plane and check into a hotel. And, if it's Tuesday, it must be Tulsa. And now it's, I hope I don't trip over my ring light. And where should I put the flowers? Like, it's a very different kind of tour now. But I'm very grateful we can even do this. And honestly, you and I might not be able to do this if it weren't for the virtual tour thing.
Exactly. Since I abandoned you in Asheville.
I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. It's fine. I'm over it.
So I'm going to pile onto your summary of the book and just add a couple things, because I think it's really, for those who are watching and thinking about buying it, and you should, it's really incredibly, and I'm sure you meant this, but it's so timely and so relevant, and so like such a book for now. All these pieces carries all these messages that I think we all need to hear right now about who we are as a nation and as a people, what our capacity is to kind of come together during difficult times. What does it mean to be grateful, period? And I just love all that, in addition to loving the characters and the historical bits, as someone who is researching some similar periods of American history. I loved a lot of the overlap with some of the things that I've come across. So I want to jump right in. Let's start with Sarah Hale. And you gave a little bit of a description of knowing about her story for a while. She was a journalist, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. Like, I wondered if that was what initially drew you to her. And I wonder if you could talk too about a little bit more about the evolution of you finding her story and what it meant to you.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't remember when I first came across Sarah Josepha Hale in particular. I think it was when I was working on something else. You know how it is when you're researching something else and you go through so many documents and so many articles and so many things, and then you see a name or a person and you think, huh, that's kind of interesting. And what I always do is I keep so many files of ideas. And by idea, I mean, it could be a Post-it stuck on the wall. It could be a photo that I stick in, Dropbox. It could be anything. And when I came across her story, and she was interesting to me because this was a person who in the 19th century, had no formal schooling and was widowed with 5 kids and went on to be one of the most influential editors, in the 19th century. And as a woman without a formal education, as a woman struggling to support her family, I found that really compelling. However, like I said, I didn't really want to do a biography, but the whole, her petitioning and finally connecting with Lincoln was really interesting to me, but I still couldn't sort of like find a way into the story. She was she was one of those people when I was researching her, I just thought she did so much. She wrote novels, she published other people's work, she did anthologies. She wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. I mean, we've all heard of Mary Had
and we'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
There's so many gems like that. That's what I love about the story.
She raised money for the widows of people lost at sea. She, raised money for Revolutionary War monuments. She was constantly kind of doing for others while she was pretty much trying to, support herself and her family. And she published a lot of people before they were well known, including, Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, she was really she was like this OG influencer, I mean, she was, you take Kim Kardashian and put her in the 19th century and have her petitioning, presidents to start a holiday. And you've got Sarah Josepha Hale, except Sarah Josepha Hale just wore black and had crinolines and bustles and all that sort of stuff. But
no Instagram.
Yeah, which is
no
not
Instagram at the time.
Yeah, no Instagram. So I found her very compelling in that way. And the fact that she was a female journalist and being a female journalist, that was also something that I was really interested in, the idea of the role that media played in cultural development and the role that the media played in relation to the presidency, and the role that, media played in popularizing ideas, whether it be white wedding dresses or Christmas trees, both of which she helped popularize in her magazine. And those 2 ideas seem to have stuck around for a while, to, actually creating a holiday. And so the media aspect of this was also really, really interesting to me. So, but you talk about it being timely, and what's so funny, and this, is when you conceive of what you think you want to be a book to be, and you pitch it, and then, it gets tweaked, and you write it and you revise it. I mean, all of that stuff happens, and you have no idea what the world is going to look like when that book is published. I had no idea the world was going to look like this when I was writing this book. but I think it's because that ideas like gratitude are so timeless and so important and resonate so much with people that that I think it still feels timely, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that piece of it is probably what allowed her to get the ear of influential people at certain times along the way. And in particular, I'm curious about Lincoln. And, you know, it's hard to imagine now a journalist and the president of the United States cooperating on anything.
Eye to eye and saying, let's do something. Yeah.
Forget about it. Right. So, talk a little bit about what, as far as you were able to research, what did Lincoln think of her? Why did she get his attention, and why did he help?
It was, Seward was, Seward was a big part of that. She wrote him as well. And, I think, I wish I could have found, as we do research on these things, it's, you want that one letter that says, I love Sarah Josepha Hale because ... love Abraham Lincoln. But you never seem to find those things. But I feel as though he was probably looking for a way to kind of get people to coalesce around something that they could probably all get behind. She had petitioned 4 other presidents before him, all of whom kind of, ignored her request to establish this holiday. She had been writing governors and ambassadors and the heads of territories and other parts of what was then the, parts of the United States that weren't states yet. Asking them to kind of get on board with her idea of, hey, we all sort of do these things, because Thanksgiving was, this year, Massachusetts, we're going to have it in October this year because of when the harvest is coming in. And New York is like, yeah, we're going to have ours in November. And this Connecticut's, yeah, we're going to do December. And she just said, we want it to be on the same day. And everybody and all together. And there was this, I think, and I have no evidence that the two of them ever met in person. However, her daughter's brother-in-law did know Lincoln, General Hunter. And so the possibility of her having met him does exist. I just could never find proof that she did.
Yeah.
But her father was a Revolutionary War veteran. And she loved the Union. She didn't want to see the United States break apart. Abraham Lincoln was very vocal about the idea that he did not want the United States to break apart. So I think without sort of, getting together in person and, conspiring to make this thing happen, when she wrote this letter to him and also wrote, Seward separately. And then, Seward approached Lincoln and said, we should do this. And Lincoln was like, yeah, let's do it. And responded very quickly, like, within a couple weeks of receiving her letter. He had issued the proclamation that, the end of November was going to be, a national day of Thanksgiving. And it was 1 week after he gave the Gettysburg Address. So it was, on the heels of some really difficult, the commemoration of a really horrific, difficult loss for everybody in the country.
Yeah.
And I thought that juxtaposition was interesting too.
And I think it's one of the strengths of the book, or at least for me personally, again, because I'm exploring some of this same time period. And I love the cameos by different figures from that time period, writers especially who she published or worked with, Frederick Douglass, Emerson Whitman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Sojourner Truth. Like I just love reliving that period of time, both before and after the Civil War, where I don't know, literature at the time was sort of having a moment in the U.S.
Yeah.
And then after the Civil War, we sort of found our footing again as a nation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those characters. Was there anyone in particular who you thought you knew, but you learned something else about, somebody who surprised you, or did you have a favorite? Talk about some of those folks who pop up now and again in the book.
For me, it's it's those intersections of events that I find really interesting. So Hale's son David went to West Point with Edgar Allan Poe, and she published some of Poe's earliest work before anybody knew who he was. And the review in the magazine, had said that, his prose was boyish and this, that, and the other, but that he showed real signs of genius. And there's a letter that I talk about in the book when her son David said, I told my classmate, Edgar, about what you said, and and it was just interesting. And she had a relationship with Poe that continued on until the end of his life. In fact, her magazine Godey's was the first to publish the Cask of Amontillado, and so that sort of stuff, those intersections were really interesting to me. And you talked about where writing was at this point, and this was sort of the early time of the professional writer, when writers were actually starting to get paid to write and could start to, make a living from their writing. She published and actually edited alongside for Lydia Maria Child, who's a remarkable woman. And then there were just aspects of Thanksgiving, not necessarily Hale, because the book does, go forward into the 20th and 21st century, that were really interesting. The Massachusetts 54th, which was the first all-Black regiment, in the military in the Civil War. That regiment, the seeds of that regiment were planted at a Thanksgiving dinner. And that was one of those things that I found out kind of later, after I'd done the first draft of the book, and I was like, oh my God, I got to fit this in here somewhere. Sojourner Truth going door to door to raise money to be able to bring Thanksgiving dinner to troops. All these different ways in which people came together to do what they could for this holiday that it's sort of wasn't a national holiday yet. It was, it was more regional, depending on where you were. And finding all of those little stories were really, really fascinating. And then coming into the 20th century, looking at Thanksgiving during the pandemic, during the Spanish flu,
ask about
was very interesting. Initially, just because I thought it was interesting. And then when I was editing and revising the book, it was early 2020, and it was, oh, wow, this reads very differently right now, because we're all in the midst of, we're about to go into a Thanksgiving in the midst of a pandemic. So that took on a whole other level of, whole other weight, which is one of those things where, like, you can write a book and you never know how it's going to land or the world it's going to land in. And
I just finished reading related to this, Emma Donoghue, Irish writer, her new book, it's back here somewhere, The Pull of the Stars. And it's about the same influenza, Spanish flu pandemic told through a maternity ward in Dublin in 1918. And she started the book well before any of us heard of COVID or coronavirus. And I'm just fascinated by that. But in your case, it's another example of all these little nuggets that make this book so timely and relevant and meaningful today in all these different ways. I want to like jump way ahead. You and I had talked earlier about how this is not just Sarah Joseph Hale's story. What mattered to you was really getting deeply at this idea of gratitude as it relates to sort of the American story. And I want to get your thoughts, I guess, a little bit on that idea, how it fits into who we are as a nation, and how you're thinking about it now as we're about to go into Thanksgiving, as we're in a really tricky time here in America, no matter where you stand on things. What are your thoughts on what that idea of gratitude can do to pull us through difficult times? And I want to add to that too, gratitude is also having kind of a moment within the meditation world and mindfulness, and this idea that if you just wake up and you're thankful for what you have and take a moment to say that to yourself or to whoever, it's good for your health, it's good for your sanity, and we all need that right now. So talk a little bit about gratitude, capital G.
Yeah, that is what you were just saying, was actually the final puzzle piece that made me think, okay, I think I know what I want to do this book, and that I want to do this book now. So the gratitude piece was really important to me, because one of the things I found interesting about Hale is how tenacious she was. And, this was a woman who, was widowed. She needed to earn a living. This was not an extremely wealthy woman. She really worked to better herself, and in the meantime kept bettering the lives of others. And she was behind a holiday she wanted everybody to come together on the same day and say thank you. Lincoln got on board with that in the midst of a civil war, when everyone in this country was as divided as they ever have been. But focusing just on the Civil War in that era, Hale and Lincoln, still didn't work for me, which is why when I had those pieces, I still wasn't quite sure I wanted to do this book or how I would do this book. But then, I kept thinking about the idea of gratitude. And in the last, 10, 20 years, there has been so much research, serious research, neurological research, psychiatric research into the benefits, physical, mental, emotional, of having a gratitude practice, of being appreciative of things in your daily life. And in fact, the power of being appreciative of things and grateful for things not when things are going great, but when they're not going great, is actually, all the more poignant and powerful. And I thought about and to me, that was the linchpin. And I thought about gratitude as because gratitude people have been giving thanks since they've been walking on this planet. So the idea of gratitude and the idea of rituals of Thanksgiving goes back centuries upon centuries upon centuries, long before the United States was even an idea. And so I knew that was kind of the thread that was going to tie all of this together, which is why I go way back in the book, to like ancient Rome and before, and come forward. And the gratitude piece to me is what made me say, okay, I want to do this. I want to do this book now. That was what made it work for me, because I didn't want to just do a book about Thanksgiving and the Civil War and how it came to be. That I didn't want to do. And it is, time and time again, and it's a big movement now. And there's so much scientific research supporting the power of actually taking time to just say thank you for whatever it is in your life that you are grateful for. And it's such a personal thing. Like, one person might be grateful for the fact that they have food that day. Another person might be grateful that, someone they loved had a peaceful death. I mean, there are so many different things, and
Sure. Yeah.
it's all very personal, which is what makes it so powerful, because anyone has access to it at any time. And so to me, the idea that you could, the idea that there is a holiday set aside in truth, in essence, for saying thank you together is a big thing. And that's, it's in a very, very simple way. I mean, that's what it's all about. So I just kind of looked at that idea, over a couple centuries, and, that essence, I think, is still there now.
One more question from me, and then we're going to take some audience questions virtually. On that idea of gratitude, I'd love to know, going into this weird Thanksgiving, what are you grateful for besides your beautiful husband, Joe? Like what's
He's watching. He will love that you called him beautiful.
What's in your head right now? And I guess tied to that, do you have a gratitude practice, or what do you think?
I do have a gratitude journal. I wish I were better about actually writing in it every day. Part of that is because I write in a journal every day. So, and I often in there, write things that I'm, trying to be, want to be thankful for. It has been, I think before we even went live today, I was talking to Hale and said, this is, I love Tattered Cover. I wish I were there physically, but, I'm really grateful that we have all figured out a way to kind of make the best of what is going on in the world right now. And I feel really fortunate that, if you've got food on your table and a roof over your head and people who care for you and people that you care for, what more do you need? I mean, this is on this planet. And so I am grateful. I am grateful for all that. I'm grateful for you, Neal Thompson.
Back at
seriously,
you.
like seriously, these are the kinds of things. It's like, wow, this is the weirdest book launch I've ever had in my 20, I don't even want to talk about, closer to 30 years of working as a writer. But you know what? It's okay. And I'm grateful for you because you're making it even more okay.
Ah, that's sweet.
Isn't that sweet? No, so it's all those sorts of things. But seriously, it's there's a lot to be thankful for.
I think a lot of writers are feeling some similar emotions, especially those with books coming out or about to come out. In my case, it's been a rough year on so many levels, but when you get down to it, like you said, if you've got people who you care about and care about you, roof over your head, you're safe, you're healthy, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
But I think this book is going to help us remember those things and appreciate what we have.
Thank you. I didn't intend it to land in the middle of a pandemic when we all needed to be reminded of these things, but I think it could.
I'm grateful for now knowing who I need to blame for white wedding dresses. Might just be my feminist talking here. But
I elope. Don't even. You're preaching to the choir.
Right? I'm just like, you're gonna be kidding me, this woman.
Yeah.
But no, I loved that in the book too. Neal mentioned it, just like the little nuggets about who this woman was, and I'm like, where is her movie? And why do we not have it? Like, come on. So I thank you both for that lovely conversation. And it's always so nice when the two authors know each other and they can just riff off very easily. It makes it so entertaining. Like, we're flies on the walls at your coffee date. So we just thank you for that.
And we were behaving.
Yes, you were doing great. You did a great job.
Yeah. I'm only drinking tea and kombucha here.
This is water. We could have a whole other author conversation.
Yeah.
Author happy
hour at some point.
Dark web.
Well, let's get some questions from our audience members here. So if you're watching us right now, off to the right-hand side, there's a chat feature that you guys can type your questions into for either Neal, Denise, or both. And I think this is a really good one to start off with. Denise, what was the research process like for this book? Because having to cover such a breadth of history, even though you had a common thread to follow. What was the research process like for you?
And can I just say thank you to the questioner, because I wanted to ask research questions, but I didn't want to nerd out too much on the writing and researching.
You know,
So-
we often have nerdy viewers who want to know everything about writing process, to
Great.
research, to like, again, I'm sure somebody would have asked the grateful question. We get a lot of weird questions around here. So
That's a good one,
research,
though.
take it away.
I will nerd out all day. So my process is, it's not the same for every book, but in the initial stages of any book, I cast a pretty wide net, because often what happens, and with this book in particular, is I become interested in one aspect of the book, but I haven't decided that's what the book is. So
Okay.
I came across Hale's story and I thought, that's interesting. So I bought a couple of old biographies of hers, going back, back quite a ways, to just sort of read about her, and okay, that's interesting. And then, you can dig into the National Archives has wonderful, like all presidential proclamations you can actually look into, going back to when people like John Adams and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were proclaiming Thanksgivings, and Samuel Adams, because there's that whole, I do get into the pre-holiday, when Thanksgiving was sort of we're going to have a Thanksgiving because, of the repeal of the Stamp Act. We're going to have a Thanksgiving because, we won this battle. We're going to have we're going to have a day of fasting and humiliation. That was a favorite. There were all these sorts of things, and the presidential documents that are available on that through the Adams Archives, through the National Archives, a number of different places. I can read like old documents for days, and actually stopping researching is one of the harder things to do. But one of my favorite things is actually touching old stuff. So I actually have a bound copy of all of Godey's magazine, the magazine that Sarah Josepha Hale edited, in which she constantly was talking, writing about Thanksgiving, etc. I have the 1863, which was the year that Lincoln agreed to proclaim Thanksgiving a national holiday. I have an original of all of those bound.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And you can just, all the articles, and the paper's so old and it's just so beautiful. So I do a lot of that kind of old paper stuff, which I love. And I do more than I need to. So I feel like you kind of go wide and then you sift depending on which direction you get pulled into. And I love old newspapers, because there is something about just seeing like what was on the front page of the paper then, like what did they care about, not just pertaining to your story, but you often hear, especially science fiction and fantasy writers will talk about the importance of world building. Narrative nonfiction writers have to do that too.
Same thing.
And we have to, if you really want to make your nonfiction book feel like a novel, you've got to pull people into your story. I mean, nobody wants to, read about Frodo if they don't have a big feeling about Middle Earth. Well, nobody wants to read about anything nonfiction if they don't have a feeling about that particular moment in time. And old newspapers and old magazines are great in that way, of just advertisements.
That's what I was gonna say. There's one of my favorite podcasts, when they do a certain special spinoff that they do, they'll read the sales of old newspapers and like talk about the old sales, which are so absurd.
My gosh.
Yeah.
I have a couple from when we start to get into how Thanksgiving evolved, and we get into Gimbels in Philly, which had the Thanksgiving parade before Macy's did.
Macy's, yeah.
And they talk about like, come to Gimbels, have your kid ride on real ponies. I was like, they had real ponies in Gimbels? What was going on there? What is this place? And, silk bloomers and, what people were charging for different kinds of things. I love that sort of stuff. And it really does make you feel, it makes you feel like you're in that moment in time. It is time traveling. It
Yes,
really is.
absolutely. Neal, do you have the same kind of philosophy in your books? Do you start wide and then sift down? Or do you kind of just go with the flow where your interests?
Or you're like, I'm going to go after this thing.
Yeah. Or do you're like, this is my thing? You know, what is it like for you as a writer?
It varies from book to book. I know that's a cop out, but it really does. I like initially going for the thing. Like, what am I really trying to get at? What's my what's my real goal here? And I try and get that thing, and then I start to build the world around that. But I will say this. So the bulk, I'm working on a new book. It's about the Kennedy family, or the immigrant Kennedys, the first Kennedys who came to America just before the time period that Denise is writing about, 1840s. And so the book takes place in this period of the 1840s through early 1900s. I started going deeper in my research in February of this year, with plans to travel to Dublin and Boston and DC and all these other places. And obviously that didn't pan out. What has been fascinating and a huge relief to me is how much I've been able to find, and how much of that world building I've been able to accomplish digitally. Like these online archives that I never knew existed.
JSTOR.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Hey, Happy Trust. Go
Happy Trust. And the Mormons.
Oh my God. Oh yeah, yeah.
Digitized everything. And without ancestry.com, myheritage.com, familysearch.com, all these things that primarily give me access not just to the genealogical stuff that I wanted, but to newspapers and other archives. Oh, yeah. I'd be screwed without it. So it's been really fascinating / frustrating to research a book during a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, speaking of books and research, Denise, I know this is a hard question to ask, especially since you literally just published a book, but are you working on something new? Has something else caught your interest in your plethora of research?
Oh, yes. No, this book, here's what's funny. This book was not supposed to be the book I was doing now. It was supposed to be the book I was doing next.
Okay.
And the book I'm doing now / next was supposed to be the one I was going to do first. Yeah. There are a number of reasons why this came first and the other one didn't. However, I was supposed to be on the road because there is an element of on the road for my next book.
Ooh.
Oh, it's a fun one.
Road trip adventures.
Yes. And I couldn't. So I'm like, but yes, another narrative nonfiction history, actually going back even further than this one. So I keep going. I went from like World War II to the Gilded Age to the 19th century, and I'm going back into the 18th century mostly for the next one. So yes. So
yes, that's okay. You don't have to
I usually have ideas. I usually have ideas stacked, but the thing is, like, when you're supposed to do them changes all the time. It just, sometimes you get, I mean, I don't know, Neal, if you go through this too, but sometimes you just sort of get a feeling like, nope, this isn't the right time for this. And it doesn't mean you don't like the idea any more or less than you did. It's just, you start to feel pulled in a different, and I don't know if that comes from, Neal and I both come out of journalism, and I don't know if it comes from that kind of the timeliness or what feels right about a story. I don't know, Neal, what do you?
Some sort of instinct sometimes, but I think it's vital, and doesn't always happen, that you have to listen to that inner voice. If something's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, it might not be the right time for this. There was a book I did years ago about a high school football team after Hurricane Katrina, and the story is wonderful, but the timing turned. We tried to publish the book 2 years after Katrina, thinking that people might be ready for sort of an anniversary story. No way. It was just awful timing. And I sort of knew that. I believed in the story. I wish I had more time to research it and go a little deeper and didn't rush to publication. So it's not exactly what you're talking about in terms of bailing on a story because it doesn't feel like the right time. But similarly, it wasn't the right time. I kind of knew it and didn't listen to that voice.
I have two really great questions here before we close out that I just can't pick one. So we're going to do both.
All right, you can do it.
Great.
They're both for both of you. That's weird. What advice do you have for writers wanting to craft narrative nonfiction stories? Because I think that there's such a art to it, and you all have already given us such great advice about the world building and, you know, following your instincts. But if you could give another little nugget of inspiration and advice to writers, what would you say?
I'll give a general piece of advice and a nerdy process piece of advice. So my general piece of advice would be, and this sounds kind of stupid and obvious, but pick something you're really curious about and interested in, because these things are in your life for a long time.
Yeah.
And I am still as interested in women who worked on the Manhattan Project as I was when I was doing Girls of Atomic City. Mm-hmm. I'm still as interested in when, the Gilded Age gave way to the Industrial Age as I was when I was doing The Last Castle. And I still find, the idea of how customs and traditions and holidays evolve and the culture that grows up around them. That's kind of a lifelong fascination for me. But it's very easy. It's actually, it's easy to get pulled into and hard to avoid the idea of what's the smart thing to do? What's the smart story to write? What's the thing that needs to be? You have to go with something that really, really hooks you as a reader, because you are going to be stuck with that thing as a researcher and a writer for a long time. And if you don't feel passionate or curious about it, you're not going to be able to convey that either through your writing or when you're actually having to promote it. And the nerdy process thing is just write a really crappy first draft.
Yeah.
That's
really crappy. I mean, horrible. And just shameful, like something you would never show anyone. I never show anyone my first draft. I show my husband, who's also an author, my second draft.
The beautiful Joe, I think.
And that's horrible.
Beautiful
too.
Joe. Yep.
Good old Joe. So it is. Those are my two, Neal. Those are my two pieces of advice.
I think they're great. A couple other thoughts are don't try and game things. Like if you think something's timely and I'm going to pounce on this, your book's going to come out through 2, 3, 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So back to Denise's point, find a story that you really care about, that you can really live with and share your passion for that story over the long haul. I think it's important too to find story and character and not just a topic. Like the history of Thanksgiving could be a topic.
Right.
Sarah Josepha Hale and her story and this idea of gratitude in America, that's a story.
Yeah.
And I think, I guess another more nerdy piece is once you find a story that you care about and you think you're onto something, make sure the information is going to be there.
They taught me that in college of make sure your research, you can actually find research on what you're looking for.
Advice I haven't always followed myself necessarily, but it helps to know that there's archival materials or so-and-so's papers, or that you can get the stuff that you're going to need to bring that story alive.
Yeah, totally.
Excellent. Well, then I think this is a great question to end on. Again, I would love to hear both of your perspectives on it. On what did this book teach you, either about yourself as a writer, a nerdy little gem of a fact, or just, history or yourself, or what did this book teach you? Which I'm sure is different for both of you, having different perspectives on it. So, Neal, do you have one while Denise is thinking?
Neal, go first.
Yeah, I will go first, and it's a really good question. And it's a tricky one.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question.
A bunch of smaller lowercase things about these different characters, obviously about Thanksgiving itself. But I think I learned something about America's resilience.
Damn, I wish I would have thought of that. God,
you want to borrow it?
That's a good answer.
Thanks. Sorry to have stolen it from you. Shit.
Oh, keep going, whatever.
But it's true. And especially now we're reading all this crap in the news day in and day out, and to read a story that reminds us that we're tougher than we think, maybe, and we care about each other more than we think. That resilience piece was hopeful and inspiring at a time when I wasn't always feeling so hopeful.
I love that. That's great. Another reason to buy this book.
Totally.
I love that cover too, and thank you. And when I was working on it, I did find it was these like just small moments of grace that I would come across in a story about Thanksgiving at an orphanage, or a bomber coming home after World War II to spend Thanksgiving with his mother. And it wasn't about the grand gesture, it was about these small moments of caring. And resilience is a great way to put it, but also just taking a moment to say, with everything else that's going on in the world right now, and in this book, three different, the Civil War, World War I, and World War II are all in this book. And just seeing people figure out a way, no matter how small, to just take a minute to say thank you for something with other people, no matter how horrible things were looking. And that to me is as timeless a lesson, a sentiment as you can find, and something that goodness knows we need right now. It's hard, but the thing is, those little moments of grace really can propel you forward and sustain you. And I like to think that, as Lincoln said, the ability to do that really does just demonstrate the better angels of our nature.
Yeah.
I love where that ended. It's just so good. No, but truly, like, sometimes events you're just like, and we're gonna end there because we're at time. Like, this had such a nice flow to it. So thank you both for ending us on such wonderful, hopeful thoughts. Thank you for the gift of this book, Denise. Thank you, Neal, for the gift of your time and those kind questions. And
thank you, Neal.
Thank you so much for a wonderful event. I want to encourage everyone that they can get signed copies of We Gather Together at tatteredcover.com or at any of our locations in the Denver metro area, so you guys can pick up your copy. And I want to give each of you a moment to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and any other last minute thoughts you have before we close out. Neal, will you start us off, and then we'll end with our author of the hour?
Sure. And thank you for hosting this. Thanks to Tattered Cover. And for those listening, I hope you'll buy the book and buy it from Tattered Cover. Or if you're watching from somewhere else, get it at your local indie bookstore. Yep. I'm an author. You mentioned in the beginning of the conversation that I published 5 books. I've got another one coming out. It'll either be late next year or early the following year. There's a lot of information about my books and my journalism at nealthompson.com. I dabble on Instagram, not so much on Twitter or Facebook, but yeah, find me on Instagram, follow me, or shoot me a note on my website. Thanks for reading, guys.
And Denise.
Thank you so much to Neal. Thank you.
Oh,
And also, thank you, Michaela, and thank you, Tattered Cover. I have such great memories of your store, and I can't wait to be back there in person again. But I'm so glad you guys were willing to do this.
Absolutely.
You can read about my my books, my books and my journalism, and I host an author conversation series called
wish
Craft.
we brought that up. It's awesome.
Yes, it's fun.
What? Is it on YouTube or is it a podcast? What is it?
I host it on Crowdcast and then post them all on YouTube.
Nice.
So it's Craft Authors in Conversation, and it's basically kind of similar to tonight, but not necessarily as focused on a book. Might be a whole hour just talking about like how you read. It's nerd central in a lot of ways.
Nice.
Used to have it in person and at a local cocktail bar here in Asheville, and a craft cocktail was created by one of the owners of the bar that was inspired by whoever the guest author was.
That's really cool.
And they're still doing them for me, and I'm just posting the recipes online, which is not quite the same as being in their bar and drinking them while you're talking. But all about, craft and my books and my tour. Most of the information is, it's my website's the best place to go first, which is DeniseKiernan.com. I'm on Instagram, and my links to all those things are on my website too. I'm on Instagram more than anything else. I do some Twitter and some Facebook. I'm just not as diligent about it as I should be. But yeah, that's where I am. That's where you can find me.
Excellent. And I'm Michaela with Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver, Colorado. Again, we encourage you to get your copy of We Gather Together from your local independent bookstore or online with us at tatteredcover.com. We can at least guarantee some signed copies for you all. And we just want to say thank you again for continuing to support local independent bookstores, continuing to support local businesses. For a lot of you right now, it's dinner time. So maybe think about ordering from a local mom and pop restaurant. So we thank you guys again, because during these tumultuous times, we would not still be here without you and without your continuous support. Denise and Neal, if you'll hang on here while I close this out. I just want to thank everyone again, and you can get your copies of We Gather Together online or in our stores at Tattered Cover. And we thank you guys so much. Stay safe and happy reading. Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And we're out.
Yay.